CEO tests, employees with Undercover Janitor. What they did got them fired on the spot. They say the truth hides in plain sight, that no one sees the cleaner walking past. And that's exactly what Richard Brooks was counting on. At 68 years old, Richard wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to find scrubbing office floors at midnight. Silver hair, quiet eyes, and a calmness that came from a life of discipline. A retired military man, a former business owner, and also the father of C.J. Brooks, the billionaire CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. But now, he wore a wrinkled gray janitor uniform and pushed a mop cart through glass doors that had his son's name on them. No one recognized him. No one looked twice. And that was perfect, because this wasn't just cleaning. It was a mission. He was there to find the truth about what had happened to the company he and his son had once built with hope, heart, and hard work. And within hours of walking through those halls, Richard saw it. The rot. He passed executives who didn't even glance his way. He heard laughter behind closed doors, cruel jokes about people who weren't in the room. And when he did speak, polite, careful, quiet, he was brushed off, ignored, or worse, mocked. It was like he was invisible, and that made him dangerous, because while they laughed and bragged and walked past him without thought, Richard was watching, listening, remembering. He started on the 18th floor, the executive level. The carpets were thicker, the lighting soft, the offices full of glass and sleek wood. But beneath the surface, it felt cold. Not just from the air, conditioning, but from the way people acted. His first night, he saw a young janitor, maybe barely 20, get yelled at by a woman in heels and a sharp suit. She pointed at a smudge on the glass wall like it was a crime. The boy apologized. She didn't even look at him after, just snapped her fingers and walked off. Later, another man, tall, loud, wearing $1,000 watch, laughed and called. The cleaners, the help. That man's name was Alan. Richard remembered it. And her name was Vanessa. 2 names, 2 faces, 2 voices full of fake smiles and fake charm and real power. They didn't know that the man emptying their trash was CJ's father. The same man who had built the original cleaning company before it became Brooks Global. The man who had once cleaned buildings by hand to put food on the table, long before billion-dollar contracts and corporate awards. And now here he was again, bending, scrubbing, wiping, listening. Every night he'd go home and record what he saw. Who said what? Who treated people with kindness? And who didn't? And patterns began to show, like how people always stopped talking when he entered a room, or how certain staff were always walking on eggshells, or how Alan and Vanessa treated fear like a tool, a way to keep people in line. But what really got to Richard wasn't just the bullying or the ego. It was how far removed the company had become from what it used to be. He remembered when CJ was just starting out, full of ideas, always talking about how a company should feel, like a team, about culture, respect, growth with purpose. And now Richard saw people with tired eyes, good people, smart people, carrying fear on their faces, rushing to please those above them, afraid to speak up, afraid to make a mistake. It wasn't just numbers or reports. It was something deeper, something rotten, and that made Richard more sure than ever. He wasn't just going to clean this building, he was going to clean house. But he also saw glimmers of hope. A young receptionist who always smiled and offered coffee at the end of his DI shift. A maintenance worker who quietly fixed broken heaters after hours when no one else would. A shy intern in IT who stayed late, always working hard, rarely noticed. Not everyone was like Alan and Vanessa. There were still good people in this place, and Richard was going to protect them because they deserved better. And because his son, CJ, deserved the truth. This wasn't just about bad leadership. It was about the soul of the company, and the man they thought was just a janitor was there to save it. By the end of his first week, Richard Brooks had already seen more than he wanted to. He had walked silent hallways where fear lingered like dust, seen brilliant people treated like they were lucky just to exist, and he'd memorized faces, people who smiled at the powerful and sneered at the invisible. But he was far from done. Every night, after his shift, Richard sat alone in his small kitchen, typing notes on an old laptop, his fingers slow but steady. He kept a journal, encrypted and secure just for his son. It wasn't just names or dates, it was feelings, moments, patterns. Things that never showed up in reports. His notes weren't pretty. Employee morale looks strong on paper, but I see people avoiding eye contact, whispering, walking on eggshells. This is not a healthy company. It's just a shiny shell hiding a lot of fear. He watched how Vanessa Carter, the HR head, ruled like a queen with a sharp tongue. One moment she smiled for the cameras, the next she tore someone apart over a missed deadline. And Alan Winters, the COO, he wasn't just arrogant. He was careful, strategic, always watching, always controlling. Richard understood men like that. Men who used charm as a mask but behind closed doors manipulated, pressured, and broke people. And the saddest part? His son CJ didn't see it. CJ was too far away now. The CEO, the face of the brand. He gave speeches about teamwork and vision. But that wasn't what Richard saw on the inside. Somewhere along the line, CJ had trusted the wrong people. And those people had taken over. It wasn't CJ's fault. Not really. Richard had been there once too, so focused on growth that he'd missed the cracks forming underneath. But now it was his job to see those cracks and shine a light on them. So he kept moving. He learned the cleaning routes, memorized which floors were quiet and which were tense. He adjusted his schedule to pass through rooms when conversations were still fresh. And because he kept his head down, people talked around him like he didn't exist. But he was listening, like the time he was wiping a conference table and heard two executives discussing a shadow budget that didn't match the one shown to finance. Or when he overheard HR rewriting an employee file to make a resignation look like a termination for cause, just to avoid paying severance. At night, he would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling. Not from exhaustion, but frustration. How did things get so bad? But then, there were little moments that gave him hope. There was Trina, the receptionist who offered him coffee every night and said things like, "Hope your shift goes well," like she meant it. There was Mike, the maintenance supervisor who fixed broken heaters quietly on his own time, so people didn't have to freeze in silence. And there was Jaden, a young tech intern who worked quietly in the corners of the building, always trying to stay out of the way. Richard watched him struggle to speak, up in meetings, only to be brushed aside. But these people, they cared, and Richard started to see something else. These quiet employees weren't just surviving under bad leadership, they were holding the company up. They were the reason the lights stayed on, the systems worked, the building didn't fall apart. They were the heartbeat. And no one noticed. Except Richard. So, one night, he approached Trina as she was closing her desk. "You're kind to people," he said gently, still in his cleaner role. "Even when they're invisible. That's rare." Trina looked up, surprised. "I guess I've been invisible too," she said with a small laugh. "People like us notice each other." Richard smiled. He didn't tell her who he was. Not yet. But that night, he added her name to a quiet list he was keeping. Not of the people causing harm, but of those worth protecting. He was starting to realize something bigger now. This wasn't just about finding villains or proving fraud. This was about protecting the people who still believed in what Brooks Global could be. The people CJ had once dreamed of building this company for. Richard may have entered the building just to gather facts. But now he had a mission to save the company from the inside before it was too late. And the janitor they all ignored, he was just getting started. Richard was starting to understand something very clearly. The real strength of Brooks Global wasn't in its executive offices or million-dollar contracts. It was in the quiet people, the ones who showed up, did their jobs, treated others with decency, and went home tired but proud. And these people were the ones holding everything together, while the top leadership tried to tear it all down behind closed doors. He began noticing them more and more. Trina, the night receptionist, always had a granola bar in her drawer for interns who skipped dinner. She remembered birthdays, knew the names of people's kids, and somehow stayed kind in a place that rewarded cruelty. Richard would pass her desk during his rounds, and she always greeted him. "Hey, Rick, coffee's fresh if you want some." "Thank you, Miss Trina," he'd say, smiling gently. "Just Trina," she'd laugh. "I'm not that fancy." Then there was Mike, the guy in charge of maintenance. Late 30s, quiet, worked with his hands and didn't care much for office politics. Richard had noticed how Mike often handled repair jobs off the books, fixing space heaters, broken chairs, AC units no one else would bother with. One night, Richard watched from a distance as Mike repaired a jammed office door on the 3rd floor. A young assistant had been locked out of her workspace for 2 days. Facilities said it wasn't urgent. Mike fixed it in 10 minutes with a screwdriver, flashlight, and a quiet, "Don't mention it." Richard approached him after. "So, do that often?" he asked. Mike shrugged. "When I can. The official channels are broken, so someone's got to do it." They spoke more after that. Shared coffee from thermoses, swapped stories. Mike didn't know who Richard was, but he liked him, trusted him. Same went for Jaden. He was easy to miss. Skinny, always hunched over 3 glowing monitors in the corner of the tech department. Didn't talk much. Probably early 20s. He looked like he didn't sleep and probably lived on vending machine snacks. But Jaden was brilliant and curious. Richard would pass his desk late at night, and sometimes Jaden would still be coding, earbuds in, tapping away, like he was chasing a ghost through the servers. Then, one night, Jaden looked up. "Hey, Rick, right?" "Yeah." "You ever wonder why the network logs reset every Thursday at 11:45 p.m.? Richard paused. "Not something I'd know about." "Why?" "No reason," Jaden muttered. "It's probably nothing." But Richard could tell it wasn't nothing. Jaden had seen something. He just didn't know who to tell, or who to trust. That's what Richard was seeing everywhere. People with good hearts, bright minds, steady hands, all hiding in plain sight. Some were scared. Some were tired. Some were just trying to survive. And none of them felt seen. Richard started building quiet connections. Not by revealing who he was, but by being present, listening, asking the right questions, not pushing, just being there. He learned the cleaning staff shared 1 small locker room and 2 broken showers for the entire night shift. HR knew. They didn't care. He learned Trina had a daughter with asthma, and the insurance plan had quietly cut back on coverage this year. He learned Mike had refused to sign off on a safety report that wasn't true. And afterward, his hours were quietly reduced. He learned Jaden had built a security system that could catch fraud in real time, and was told to stay in his lane. It made Richard ache, because this wasn't just a company with a leadership problem. It was a company that had stopped seeing people. He thought about CJ, his son, the boy who once swept gym floors after school just to help out at the original family cleaning business. The man who used to say things like, "Dad, I want to build something that lasts, something that feels like home for people." What would CJ think if he saw all this? Would he even believe it? That's why Richard kept writing, documenting, gathering. But this wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about protection. These people, Trina, Mike, Jaden, and others, they were worth saving. Not just for what they did, but for who they were. Richard started thinking of them as his new team. Quiet warriors, brave in ways no one saw, and he would protect them, even if they never knew who he really was. He wasn't just documenting wrongdoings anymore. He was learning names, faces, fears, hopes. And the more he saw, the more certain he became. The heart of this company wasn't in its leadership, it was in its people. And Richard Brooks, the janitor no one noticed, was going to make sure that heart kept beating, no matter what it took. Friday nights at Brooks Global were supposed to be quiet, just a few tired employees finishing their work before the weekend. But not this Friday. On the executive floor, music played softly in the background. Wine glasses clinked, laughter echoed against the glass walls. Alan Winters, the COO, had organized a team celebration, though it was really just another private party for his inner circle. Richard had learned the pattern. These gatherings were less about bonding and more about flexing. Status was everything. Everyone wanted to be close to Alan, laugh at his jokes, pretend to enjoy the same wine he drank. Richard was pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway when he saw the cluster of people in the executive lounge. He slowed his pace, eyes down, staying invisible. Alan's voice boomed from inside. "Another round, and bring out the good stuff. We're celebrating progress, people." Richard didn't flinch. He knew what progress meant in Alan's world. It meant someone got fired. Someone else got scared. Some department was reorganized to put his people in charge. As Richard turned to clean the hallway nearby, Alan spotted him. "Hey, janitor!" he called out, his voice cutting through the conversations like a knife. Richard looked up slowly. "Yes, sir?" "What's your name again?" Alan asked, stepping toward him. "With a half-empty glass of bourbon. Rick Johnson," Richard replied calmly. Alan smirked. "Rick, huh? Well, Rick, tell me, how long have you been cleaning up after us?" Richard kept his tone polite. "About 3 weeks, sir." 3 weeks, Alan said, turning to the small crowd that had gathered. 3 weeks and already. He's part of the team. There was laughter, nervous, awkward, the kind people use when they don't know what else to do. Alan stepped closer. "So, Rick, what do you think of the company? Impressed with what we've built here?" Richard stayed still. "Seems like a successful business." "Seems like a successful business," Alan repeated, mimicking his voice and turning back to the others. "Our janitor's got an eye for economics, folks." More laughter. Richard felt the heat rising up his neck but kept his posture relaxed. Alan circled him like a lion with a wounded animal. "Tell me, Rick, do you even know what Brooks Global does? Like, what we actually do?" Richard blinked. "Something with computers, I believe." That answer got the biggest laugh yet. Vanessa Carter, drink in hand, stepped forward with a grin that didn't touch her eyes. "Well, that explains the cleaning standards." Richard took a deep breath. They were trying to break him, turn him into a joke, show the others what happened when someone didn't play their game. Alan suddenly stopped. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a clean section of the hallway tile. Richard looked. The floor was spotless. "It looks clean to me, sir." Alan's smile vanished. He reached for a full glass of cold water sitting on a nearby tray. "Let me help you see it better," he said, and without warning, poured it over Richard's head. Gasps echoed through the room. Laughter followed, some real, some forced. Richard stood still. Water dripped from his silver hair down his collar. His shirt clung to his skin, but he didn't flinch, didn't wipe his face, didn't even blink. Alan leaned in, triumphant. "Now, you've definitely got something to clean up." Vanessa snapped a picture on her phone. "Best Janitor Award, right here," she said to a few nervous chuckles. From the corner of his eye, Richard saw her, Trina, standing frozen near the reception desk, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Behind her, Mike stood, stiff, fists clenched at his sides, but neither of them moved, not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. Speaking up now would cost them their jobs, or worse. Richard gently placed his mop back in the bucket, then looked Alan square in the eyes. For the first time, he stood tall, not as Rick the janitor, but as Richard Brooks, the man who had once led soldiers through storms, built a company with his bare hands, and raised a son who believed in better. "I believe that's your mess, Mr. Winters," he said quietly. The room went silent. No sarcasm, no anger. Just a simple sentence, and a dignity that made even the loudest laughers fall still. Richard turned and walked away, water still dripping down his back. No one stopped him, Trina whispered as he passed. "I'm so sorry." Richard gave her a gentle nod. "It's not your fault." Back in the janitor's closet, he changed into a dry shirt he kept just in case. He looked in the cracked mirror on the door. His eyes were calm. They had tried to humiliate him, but all they had done was prove who they really were. Later that night, in CJ's home office, Richard showed him the footage, recorded by Trina from her phone. CJ watched it in stunned silence. When the video ended, his jaw was tight. "I'm ending this now," CJ said through clenched teeth. "He's done. They both are." But Richard put a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet," he said. "That shows what kind of man he is, but we still need to show what he's doing. The fraud, the plan, the real damage." CJ nodded, eyes filled with fire. "Okay, we finish this right." And as Richard walked back to his car that night, he heard a voice in his head from long ago. His old military captain, during a brutal training week. "The hardest battle isn't out there. It's the one where you don't swing first." Richard smiled. Round 1 was over. The war had just begun. The humiliation was already becoming a distant memory. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. But because Richard Brooks had something more urgent on his mind now. Time. After the water incident, it was clear that Alan and Vanessa were getting bold. Too bold. And bold people make mistakes when they think no one's watching. But someone was. Richard didn't sleep that weekend. He was in the quiet corners of the office each night, moving silently through executive floors, listening behind doors, eyes and ears wide open. On Sunday, CJ sent him a message. Board meeting moved. Up. Friday. That's when they'll try it. The takeover. Richard had suspected it. But now, he was sure. Alan and Vanessa weren't just corrupt. They were planning to remove CJ, sell the company under the radar, and walk away richer than ever. They'd spent months poisoning the well, hiding behind falsified reports, restructuring departments, removing anyone who stood in their way, and it had almost worked. Until now. Because the janitor they never noticed was about to turn the lights on. It started in the server hallway on a rainy Monday evening. Richard saw Jaden sitting in front of 3 monitors, chewing his lip, the glow of code reflected in his glasses. Richard didn't speak at first. He just cleaned quietly nearby, waiting. Eventually, Jaden looked over. "Hey, Rick," he said. Then, after a pause, "Can I ask you something weird?" Richard nodded. "Try me. You ever wonder why a cleaning guy knows when people are moving between floors, where the conference rooms are, what time HR leaves, and who's behind which door?" Richard didn't answer. Jaden leaned closer. "You're not just a cleaner, are you?" Richard smiled faintly. "No, I'm not." Jaden hesitated, then said, "Good, because I think you're the only person I can show this to." He spun his monitor toward Richard. "This," he said, "is what I've been tracking. Look at these file transfers, every Thursday night. Same credentials. Same destination, a remote server registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands." Richard blinked. "That's offshore laundering." Jaden nodded. "And that's not all. Look at what's being sent. Internal budgets, client projections, executive salary packages, board voting profiles. They're building a case. Against CJ. Exactly. To make it look like his leadership is killing the company. And their division? Suddenly, it's the only one bringing in revenue." Richard leaned in, a pit in his stomach growing. "Can you prove this isn't just clever accounting?" "I already did," Jaden said, pulling up another file. "I built a mirror system weeks ago. This one logs activity before the official logs are overwritten. Timestamps, IP addresses, access keys, it's all here. Can you back it up somewhere?" "Safe?" Richard asked. "I already did. 3 different drives encrypted. 2 are off-site." Richard put a hand on his shoulder. "You're smarter than half the executives upstairs." Jaden chuckled quietly. "Which is probably why I'll never become one." Richard shook his head. "That's about to change. Over." The next few days, Richard activated his quiet little network. He met Mike in the basement while pretending to fix a pipe. "Got the documents," Mike whispered, sliding a worn envelope into Richard's hand. "Backdated inspection reports, falsified maintenance logs, HR covering up workplace injuries, all signed by Vanessa." They spoke for no more than 90 seconds. That was the rule. No long talks, no suspicions. Richard stored the envelope under his cleaning cart, behind the mop bucket, right next to the coffee-stained rags no one would dare touch. Later that night, Trina passed him a flash drive wrapped in a sticky note. HR visitor logs. Last 6 months, it read. They're scrubbing names. Here's the original. Every night, Richard would go home, connect each piece of data, each recording, each conversation. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier. Alan and Vanessa had built a structure of control. Not just financial fraud, but fear, gaslighting, lies. They isolated people, changed logs, blamed interns, erased video files, shifted blame just enough to stay untouchable. Until now. Richard knew they were getting nervous. He saw it in their eyes. Alan was watching him closer. Vanessa started asking more questions to security. Someone in IT tried to remotely wipe old badge access logs, but Jaden had already made backups. Then came the mistake. Richard overheard a meeting, late Thursday night. Alan and another man. Richard was cleaning near the break room when he heard the voices through the paper-thin walls. The board vote is Friday. It's locked in, Alan said. We paint CJ's projects as financial disasters, blow up the losses, then push Global Tech as our white knight. They buy us cheap. We get out rich. Global Tech's lawyer already prepped the acquisition, the other man said. $20 million to each of you hidden under consulting fees. Cayman account gets triggered once the board removes Brooks. And his father? The man asked. Who cares? He's nothing. Richard didn't move. Didn't breathe. That was it. The final piece. They were committing to it, believing no one could stop them, and they had no idea that the janitor in the hallway had just recorded every word. That night, Richard didn't go home. He went straight to CJ's private residence. He handed him the files, the recordings, the flash drives. CJ sat in stunned silence as the truth played out across the screen. They're not just stealing, CJ whispered. They're trying to bury me. Richard nodded, and they nearly did. CJ looked up. But we've got them now. Richard smiled, a quiet, tired smile. Yes, son. Now. We go to war. Friday came like a loaded gun. The tension in the building wasn't loud. It was quiet, tight, heavy. Like everyone could feel that something was about to happen but didn't know what. Except Richard. He knew exactly what was coming. It started that morning with a glance. Alan Winters spotted him in the hallway outside the executive suite. The smirk he usually wore was gone. His eyes followed Richard's every move, sharp and suspicious. Something was off. Richard kept calm, moved like he always did, slow, quiet, nothing out of place. He cleaned a glass door, wiped a table, changed a trash liner, but the air had changed, and so had Alan. That afternoon, just after 5 p.m., Richard was called to the lounge on the executive floor. He pushed his cart through the glass doors. The lounge was full. More people than usual. Executives, middle managers, even a few department heads. Music was low, drinks in hand, laughter, forced. Something wasn't right. Then he heard his name. "Rick," Alan called from across the room, a drink in his hand. "Come here a second." Richard walked over slowly, calm, careful, ready. "You know?" Alan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There's something about you I can't quite figure out." Richard didn't respond. "You walk around here like you belong, like you're not just some cleaner with a mop, like you're watching us." A few heads turned, Alan's smile twisted. "And guess what? We found something today." He reached under the bar and held up a small black recorder. "This was under my desk." Gasps. Some whispers. Vanessa appeared beside him, arms crossed, face tight. "You planted this, didn't you?" she said sharply. Richard remained still. "We asked security. Traced back entry logs. Guess who was in my office the night it was placed?" Alan stepped closer. "You." There it was, the moment. Richard took a deep breath. He wasn't surprised. He'd known this day would come. "You think you're clever, old man?" Alan hissed. "Sneaking around, spying. We could press charges." He turned to the room. "But we won't. We'll just do what we do to rats when we find them in our house." Alan stepped back dramatically and raised his voice. "You're fired, Rick. Effective immediately. Security will walk you out." Vanessa added, "You're lucky we don't sue." Laughter. A few people clapped, unsure if it was a joke or not. Others just watched, uncomfortable. Trina stood at the reception desk, frozen. Mike stood near the service door, jaw tight. Richard picked up his bucket. And then, just like before, Alan grabbed a glass of water and threw it over him. Cold. Splashing down Richard's face, his shirt soaked, his back stiff. The room went silent again. Alan smiled, satisfied. That's how we deal with traitors. But Richard didn't move. He just looked Alan in the eye, calm, even now. Not broken, not even shaken. And for the first time, Alan looked nervous. "You sure that was a smart move, Mr. Winters?" Richard asked quietly. Alan blinked. "Excuse me?" Richard slowly straightened his back, removed the ID tag from his shirt, set it on the counter. Then he reached into the mop cart and pulled out a small flash drive. One copy of many. "This is going straight to the board," he said calmly. "Every file, every recording, every conversation." Vanessa stepped forward, panicked. "You're just a janitor. You don't have access to—" "I'm not a janitor," Richard interrupted. "Not really." He looked toward Trina. She reached under her desk and pulled out her phone. "Got the whole thing," she said quietly. Every word, every drop. Alan's voice dropped low. "Who are you?" Richard met his eyes. "I'm the man who built this company with my son. I'm the reason CJ got through college. I'm the one who scrubbed floors so we could build something better." He stepped toward Alan. "And I'm the one who's been watching you, listening, recording, while you laughed and lied and stole." Gasps. Again. Whispers. Phones in hands now. People texting. Alan's face went pale. Security didn't even have to move. Richard walked himself to the elevator. Wet, calm, done. He passed Mike on the way out. "You okay?" Mike whispered. Richard nodded. "Better than ever." An hour later, Richard sat across from CJ in his private home office. He handed him the final flash drive. Everything. The water. The threats. Their plan. CJ's hands shook as he plugged it in. He watched in silence. His father standing, tall on the screen, soaked and silent, refusing to break. "This is it," CJ said quietly. "We're done waiting." He pulled out his phone and sent a message to his executive assistant. Operation Clean Sweep is a go. All through the weekend, Richard, CJ, and a small team worked behind closed doors. Lawyers, auditors, trusted allies from the board. They prepared everything: the evidence, the presentation, the emergency staff meeting, and one more thing: a stage, because Monday morning, CJ Brooks wasn't just going to fight back, he was going to show the whole company the truth. Monday morning didn't feel like a normal workday. From the moment the sun came up, there was a strange buzz in the air at Brooks Global. Whispers floated through the halls. Texts flew between departments. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone had received the same email just after 6 a.m. Emergency all-staff town hall, 9 a.m. sharp, mandatory. By 8:50, the central atrium was packed. Every floor had emptied. Some employees stood along the staircases. Others leaned over railings to watch from the balconies above. A few even live-streamed on their phones, just in case something big happened. No one had seen the CEO in weeks, and no one expected what came next. At exactly 9 a.m., the side door opened. Richard Brooks walked in, still wearing his janitor's uniform. There was a collective gasp. People nudged each other. "That's the guy," someone whispered. "The one Alan dumped water on." And right behind him, in a crisp navy suit, walked CJ Brooks, the CEO, head high, face calm. But his eyes were full of fire. They stepped onto the small stage. CJ didn't waste a second. "Good morning," he said, his voice firm and steady. "Let me start by saying, I've failed you." The room went still. For months, maybe years, I've trusted the wrong people. I believed reports that looked perfect. I relied on numbers that were clean. I gave power to leaders who used fear to run this company. He paused, looked around, until one person decided to go undercover and find out the truth. He gestured toward Richard. "This man, who many of you know as Rick the Cleaner, is my father. Richard Brooks, the founder of the original company. The reason Brooks Global exists at all." The gasps turned to murmurs. All eyes snapped to Richard. He stood quietly. No theatrics, no smile. Just presence, CJ continued. "For the past 4 weeks, he's walked our halls, scrubbed our floors, and watched how we treat each other. He recorded meetings, gathered documents, captured the real culture that had taken over." Behind them, a large screen flickered to life. The first video played, Alan dumping water over Richard's head. Loud laughter, mocking, silence. The room recoiled. Then, audio clips. Vanessa's voice, cold, biting. Alan bragging about cleaning out employees. Conversations about setting people up, hiding files, manipulating numbers. Then came the big one, a secret recording of Alan and an outsider discussing the takeover. "Once CJ's out, we sell to Global Tech. The board votes Friday. He won't even see it coming." You could hear the shock ripple across the room. Then, photos, files, evidence, financial logs, email threads, HR documents falsified under Vanessa's name. CJ's voice broke the silence again. Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter tried to destroy this company from the inside. Today, that ends. He glanced toward the corner. 2 men in suits stepped forward. Federal investigators. Effective immediately, CJ continued. Both individuals have been terminated, stripped of access, and are now under federal investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and harassment. Before anyone could even react, security escorted Alan and Vanessa, stone-faced and silent, through the atrium. The crowd parted. No one clapped. No one stopped them. They just watched, and then looked back. At the stage, CJ raised the microphone again. Now, let me tell you what happens next. He stepped forward. This company is not about power. It's not about fear. It's not about who talks the loudest in a boardroom. He pointed toward Trina in the crowd. Trina, who's worked our front desk for years with kindness and grace, will now help lead a newly restructured HR department. He turned toward Mike. Mike Lawson, who fixed broken systems without being asked, is our new head of facilities, with a voice at the executive table. Then he looked toward Jaden, standing in the back, stunned. Jaden, whose quiet brilliance caught a cybercrime ring before anyone else did, will head our new security innovation division. Cheers began. First small, then loud, real, from the heart. And my father, CJ said, emotion in his voice, who risked his pride, his health, and his legacy, will serve as our new chief ethics officer. His job will be simple. Make sure what happened here never happens again. The room erupted. Some clapped, some cried, some just stood there letting it sink in. That afternoon, the building felt different. Doors were open. People were talking again. Really talking. The portraits of past executives were replaced with a photo wall of everyday employees. The glass office that had once belonged to Alan was turned into a collaborative space, renamed the People's Room. And that night, long after most had gone home, Richard walked the halls one last time, wearing his old janitor's uniform, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He passed by the same desk where Trina had once quietly offered him coffee. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said now, smiling wide. "Just Richard," he replied, with a nod. Then he passed a group of interns. One of them stopped and helped him pick up a paper towel he'd accidentally dropped. "You okay, sir?" she asked kindly. Richard smiled, better than ever. Epilogues. 6 months later, Brooks Global was different. The numbers were up. But more importantly, so was the spirit. CJ walked the halls weekly. The suggestion boxes were full. HR had real listening programs. Promotions started going to quiet workers who had long been overlooked. In the main lobby, beneath the mission statement, a small plaque now read, "A company is only as good as how it treats the people no one notices." Richard Brooksand. Every time someone new joined the team, they were given a simple message. Look for the ones cleaning the rooms, talking the least, carrying the weight. That's where leadership begins.